Welcome to Midnight Clues.
With Clara Monroe and Elias Gray, we pull apart the stories the world can't stop whispering about. Okay, February 19th, 1994. Riverside General Hospital. Picture this. Gloria Ramirez comes in. She's really sick, late-stage cancer.
Right, emergency situation.
But then things get weird. There's this oily sheen on her skin, a strange garlic smell, and then, bam, medical staff just start collapsing.
One after another.
Yeah, it's totally bizarre. What on earth could cause all that? That's the mystery, isn't it?
It absolutely is, and that's what we're diving into today. Our goal here is to pull out the key theories, the main points, the lingering questions about this whole toxic lady thing, get the aha moments without drowning in details.
Got it. So let's start at the beginning. Gloria Ramirez in the ER. Late-stage cervical cancer, breathing really fast, her blood pressure's plummeting.
Standard ER stuff initially. They try to sedate her, manage her heart rate, the usual emergency protocols.
But then the weirdness starts, this oiliness on her skin. Not just sweat, right?
No, something different.
Yeah.
And this smell from her mouth described as kind of fruity, but also like garlic. Very distinctive.
Okay, that's strange enough. But the blood draw, that's where it really kicks off for the staff.
Nurse Susan Kane draws blood and immediately smells ammonia coming from the syringe. Strong ammonia smell.
Wow.
She shows it to Maureen Welch, the respiratory therapist, who smells it too.
Yeah.
Apparently she even said it smelled like chemo blood gone bad or something.
Okay.
And then the resident, Julie Gorczynski, looks closer and sees these particles floating in the blood, like vanilla-colored specks.
Particles in the blood.
Yeah. And Dr. Ochoa, the ER doc, he confirms the smell and sees the particles too. It's all happening really fast.
And then people just start dropping.
Pretty much.
Wow.
Susan Kane, the nurse who first smelled it, she faints. Then Julie Gorczynski collapses. Maureen Welch goes down too.
Oh my God.
And others nearby start feeling sick, nauseous, lightheaded.
Yeah.
Like chaos breaking out.
So what did they do? They must have thought it was some kind of toxic exposure.
Absolutely. They evacuated the ER immediately, moved patients outside, sealed the doors, told the affected staff to strip off their clothes, bag them up. Just total emergency, unknown contaminant procedure.
And Gloria Ramirez, what happened to her amidst all this?
Tragically, she was pronounced dead about 45 minutes after she arrived. The official cause given was kidney failure, a complication of her cancer.
So her death itself wasn't directly blamed on whatever made the staff sick initially anyway?
Not initially, no. But the mystery of the staff illness was huge. Her body was handled with extreme caution afterwards.
I bet, like hazmat suits.
Oh, yeah. Sealed in multiple shrouds, put in an aluminum casket, kept isolated in the morgue. The hazmat team came in, swept the ER.
And found?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. No identifiable toxin, no gas leak, zilch.
But wait, the ambulance crew who brought her in, were they okay?
Totally fine. Reported no strange smells, no symptoms, nothing unusual on the way to the hospital. Which just deepens the mystery, right?
Yeah, it makes no sense. If it came from her, why weren't they affected?
Exactly. And despite tons of investigations over the years, there's still no single agreed-upon explanation for what happened to those medical workers.
So the first official look, the autopsy, what did that show? Done in hazmat gear, you said.
Right. The Riverside Coroner's team suited up. They found the expected medications: Tylenol, lidocaine, codeine, and Tigan. That's an anti-nausea drug.
Anything unusual there?
Well, they noted that Tigan breaks down into amines, and amines can smell like ammonia. So that was a possible explanation for the smell from the blood syringe.
Ah, okay. So maybe that part wasn't so weird.
Potentially. The cause of death was listed as heart problems because of kidney and liver failure from the cancer. Pretty straightforward, medically speaking.
But it didn't explain people fainting or the oily skin. And the public wasn't buying it.
Not really. There was a lot of scrutiny. Then the California Department of Health and Human Services did their own investigation. They interviewed 34 staff members who were there.
And their conclusion was?
Mass hysteria, psychogenic illness. They basically suggested the strange smell triggered a wave of panic and stress-induced physical symptoms.
Wow, that sounds dismissive.
It was definitely controversial.
Yeah.
They pointed out that the people with the worst symptoms were mostly women, and some hadn't eaten recently, which they said made them more susceptible.
I can imagine the staff weren't happy with that explanation, getting physically ill and being told it's all in your head.
Exactly. Several of them sued for defamation, saying they suffered real physical effects. And you also had Gloria's family. They believed maybe the hospital itself was unsafe. There'd been issues before, like gas leaks, apparently.
So they thought maybe the hospital environment contributed?
That was their suspicion. Plus, adding to the sort of conspiracy vibe, The coroner's lead investigator on the case died by suicide later, and that original blood syringe, it disappeared.
The syringe vanished. Okay, that does sound suspicious.
It definitely fueled theories about a cover-up, yeah. So with all this confusion and lack of answers, the coroner reached out for outside help.
Who did they bring in?
Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, a high-tech lab dealing with nuclear chemistry, toxicology, serious stuff.
And what did they find?
A chemist there, Dr. Patrick Grant, analyzed samples from Gloria. He found real high levels of something called dimethylsulfone, DMSO2.
DMSO2, is that normally in the body?
Yes, but usually only in tiny trace amounts, like a byproduct of normal metabolism. But Gloria's levels were way, way higher than normal.
Okay, so where did all that extra DMSO2 come from?
This leads to the big theory from Livermore. It involves a related chemical, dimethyl sulfoxide, DMSO.
DMSO, I think I've heard of that. Isn't it used as like an industrial solvent?
It doesn't
Degreaser?
Exactly. But it's also been touted, sometimes controversially, as an alternative medicine, especially for pain relief. People rub it on their skin.
And does it have any properties that match the scene?
Well, yes. DMSO is known to have a garlic-like smell, and in gel form it can feel oily on the skin.
Oh, okay, smell, oily texture, starting to connect some dots.
So the Livermore hypothesis was, maybe Gloria Ramirez was using DMSO, perhaps a homemade remedy for her cancer pain.
And the DMSO2, how does that fit?
They figured the oxygen she was given first by the paramedics, then in the ER, could have chemically reacted with the DMSO in her system, converting it into this large amount of dimethylsulfone, the DMSO2 they detected.
Does that reaction actually happen?
They did lab experiments that suggested it could. They also showed that if you cool blood containing DMSO2, it can form little white crystals.
Like the manila-colored particles the staff saw.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So the DMSO theory seemed to explain the smell, the oily feel, and the particles in the blood.
Okay, but that still doesn't explain why people got sick. Fainting, nausea. DMSO2 isn't that toxic, is it?
No, DMSO2 itself isn't acutely toxic like that. This is where the Livermore theory gets even more complex and speculative, honestly.
Go on.
They proposed another chemical reaction. They suggested that the high levels of DMSO2, may be supercharged by the electricity from the defibrillator shocks they used on Gloria, could have reacted further with oxygen to create dimethyl sulfate, DMSO4.
Dimethyl sulfate, what's that?
That stuff is seriously nasty. It's a potent industrial chemical, highly toxic, absorbed through the skin, and it's actually been classified as a chemical warfare agent. A nerve agent precursor, I think.
Whoa. A war gas.
Essentially, yeah. And it's reported affects nausea, convulsions, paralysis, delirium. They do sound quite similar to the severe symptoms some of the staff experienced. It also apparently has an ammonia-like odor sometimes.
So the theory is DMSO, oxygen, dynest DMSO2, defibrillator, shocks more O2, dynest DMSO4, toxic gas, staff illness.
That's the proposed chain of events from Livermore, yes. It ties a lot of the elements together, albeit through a pretty complicated chemical pathway.
It sounds almost too elaborate. Has it held up?
Well, it faced a lot of criticism. Other chemists questioned whether that final step, creating dimethyl sulfate under those conditions, with just hospital oxygen and defibrillator shocks, was really plausible. It seemed unlikely to produce enough gas fast enough to affect so many people.
Right. And what about Gloria using DMSO in the first place?
Her family strongly denied she ever used it. And, lots of other cancer patients have probably used DMSO and received oxygen in hospitals without turning toxic.
True. So the Livermore DMSO theory, it connects some things, but it's got some pretty big question marks.
Definitely. Which opens the door to other explanations. And there's another major theory, one pushed by the New Times, LA, and killzoneblog.com.
Okay, what's that one?
This one points towards something potentially more mundane, but also maybe more sinister, methylamine, and possible links to methamphetamine production.
Meth. How does that connect?
Methylamine is a key ingredient, a precursor chemical used to make meth, but it's also sometimes used in hospitals, apparently as a disinfectant or in certain processes. And Riverside County back then reportedly had a big problem with clandestine meth labs.
Okay. So methylamine was around. How would it have affected Gloria or the staff?
Well, methylamine itself can be toxic. If inhaled, the fumes can cause symptoms like respiratory distress, dizziness, fainting. Sound familiar?
Yeah, sounds like what happened to the staff. So the theory is accidental exposure.
The idea floated is that maybe, just maybe, an IV bag at the hospital somehow got contaminated with methylamine, perhaps related to smuggling it using hospital supplies, or maybe just a terrible mix-up.
And this contaminated IV was given to Gloria?
That's the hypothesis. When connected, the chemical could have rapidly vaporized or reacted, releasing fumes that affected the nearby staff when they drew her blood or were close to her.
Wouldn't they have found methylamine later then, in
The
tests?
proponents argue it might have dissipated quickly, leaving no trace. And Killzone blog brings up a really chilling anecdote.
That's that.
They mentioned a separate case involving a death at a meth lab where law enforcement officers who handled the body later experienced very similar symptoms to the Riverside ER staff: breathing problems, skin irritation.
Wow. That lends some credibility to the idea that exposure to something like methylamine could cause those effects.
It makes it seem more plausible, yeah. And this theory is often framed as, like, Occam's razor. It's a simpler explanation: accidental exposure to a known toxin present in the area, compared to the multi-step, somewhat unlikely chemical reaction proposed by Livermore.
So a hospital mistake or even illicit activity rather than a bizarre internal chemical cascade.
That's the alternative line of thinking, yes.
Yeah.
Still unproven, of course, but compelling in its own way.
We should probably touch on the Wilder theories, too. I know BuzzFeed Unsolved mentioned some of the stuff that pops up online.
Right, you always get those with unexplained mysteries. Alien involvement, government experiments, that kind of thing.
But the sources we looked at, they don't really give those much weight, do they?
No, not based on the factual reporting or scientific investigations. They remain firmly in the realm of speculation, really. Our focus has been on the theories with at least some potential basis in the reported facts or scientific possibility.
Okay, so we've got the initial confusion, the mass hysteria theory, which felt inadequate.
Right. Then the complex DMSO to dimethyl sulfate chemical reaction theory from Livermore.
Which has plausibility issues.
And finally, the methylamine exposure theory, maybe linked to meth production or a hospital mix-up. Simpler, but also unconfirmed.
So after all this digging, all these investigations, we still don't definitively know what happened that night at Riverside General?
Nope, no single explanation has been proven beyond doubt. It remains one of modern medicine's most baffling and frankly unsettling mysteries.
It's just incredible. One patient comes in needing help and triggers this health crisis for the people trying to save her.
It really highlights the limits of our understanding sometimes, doesn't it? How complex the human body is, how unexpected chemical interactions can be, or even how human error or hidden activities can intersect with medicine in tragic ways.
Absolutely. So, thinking about everything we've laid out, the chemistry, the possibility of mistakes, the context of the time, what seems most plausible? That's really the question for everyone listening, I suppose. What does this whole bizarre toxic lady case tell us about science, medicine, and maybe the things we just can't explain yet?
It's a lot to chew on. A powerful reminder that even in sterile hospital environments, the unknown can still walk through the door.